I never thought patience was a finite thing. I really didn't, until her. I was leaning against the counter at the repair shop, earbuds tucked in, waiting for my phone to stop buzzing with notifications I didn't care about. That's when she walked in, slow, deliberate, like she owned the air around her, but didn't have to prove it. Mid-40s, I guessed, but confidence like that doesn't age, it just sharpens. A faint scent of jasmine followed her, the kind that lingers even when the person moves on. I'd seen her here before, of course. She came in every couple of weeks, dropping off some gadget or another, her hands always steady, nails unpolished but clean, sleeves rolled up just so. But today, something about the way she leaned over the counter to sign the receipt made the edges of my brain tingle. "Hey," I said, because I always said something. Something dumb. My voice cracked halfway, and I cursed myself silently. She looked up, caught the sound of my voice mid-breath, and there it was, the smallest flicker of a smile. Not indulgent, not fake, just aware. I swear, it lasted a second longer than it should have. Enough to make me forget why I was there. "You're early today," I added, trying for casual. She raised an eyebrow, slow and deliberate. "I like to get things done before the world remembers it exists." Her tone was half teasing, half impenetrable, and it made me want to ask more, but I didn't. I didn't because there was already too much there in that pause, the kind of pause that makes time feel dense and electric. I noticed the little things. How her fingers lingered on the counter as she collected her device, brushing it off like it was sacred. How she glanced at the clock, then at me, then away, as though testing if I noticed any of it. I did, and I could feel my chest tighten without warning. "I'll call if anything changes," she said, pulling her coat tighter around her shoulders. But the glance back, just for a fraction of a second, was like she'd left a mark on the air. I wanted to reach out. Not touch her, not say something clever, just stay in that fraction of a second. She left, heels clicking against the tile, leaving a faint echo of jasmine and the memory of a smile that didn't belong to me, yet felt impossibly intimate. I watched her go until the bell over the door stopped jingling, and then I realized I'd been holding my breath. I shook my head, trying to pretend I wasn't thinking about how her hair caught the light, how her jacket slipped off one shoulder for a moment, how her presence could make the world outside feel simultaneously too loud and too still. And then I caught myself, again. Already, she was in my head. Not her laugh, not even her words, just that moment when she looked at me like she knew something I didn't. I leaned back against the counter and tried to focus on the repair tickets in front of me, but it was no use. My hands fidgeted. My eyes kept darting to the door, as though maybe she'd come back, or maybe just stay there in the frame a little longer. And I realized something I didn't want to admit. I couldn't stop thinking about that pause, that half-second of shared attention that might have been nothing to her, but felt like everything to me. Patience, I thought, isn't just finite. It's fragile, and I had already started to lose mine. I didn't expect to see her again that afternoon. But there she was, standing by the corner of the shop where the old espresso machine sputtered and hissed. She'd dropped off a tablet earlier, and now she was inspecting some wiring I was supposed to fix. You don't have to do that yourself," I said, trying to sound casual, but my voice pitched too high, betraying me. She glanced over her shoulder, hair falling loosely over one eye. For a fraction of a second, her guard was there, solid, the kind that says don't get too close. And yet, she didn't step back. "I like knowing what's going on," she said quietly. Her words were measured, but there was a flicker in her eyes, something like fatigue and calculation all at once. I nodded, letting her move around the bench, pretending I wasn't noticing the way her fingers brushed the wires with careful precision. She had this rhythm, deliberate, controlled, but when she leaned in too far, I saw the tension in her shoulders. The kind of tension you can't hide, no matter how poised you try to be. "Need a hand?" I asked, stepping closer. My hands hovered near hers, careful not to touch, but fully aware of the space between us. She hesitated. Her eyes flicked to mine, a subtle war waging in that glance. Then she shook her head, almost imperceptibly. I'll manage." Her voice caught just a little, and I froze. That single catch in her tone was enough to make the room feel smaller, more intimate. I watched her laugh a little when a wire slipped, and she cursed under her breath. It was soft, almost embarrassed, but it lingered in the air, warm and unguarded. And then, her hands. God, her hands. They moved with care, but there were faint traces of strain, like she'd been holding back more than she let on. I didn't mean to, she started, then stopped. Shook her head. She didn't finish the sentence. I didn't ask. I just let the quiet stretch between us, letting her vulnerability exist without interference. I realized how rarely I saw her like this. Not polished, not in control, just human. Tired, maybe a little exasperated, but still present in a way that made the air around her feel charged. I caught a stray strand of hair falling across her face and, without thinking, brushed it aside. Her eyes met mine, a flicker of surprise, almost guilt, and then she looked down again. The moment stretched, soft and unspoken. My chest thudded quietly, awareness sharpening with every subtle gesture she made. The tilt of her head, the way her lips pressed together when she concentrated, the faint crease near her brow. And then she smiled. Not at me, not really, but at something in the room, something I couldn't see. But for a heartbeat, that smile brushed against me, pulled me closer, made the edges of my patience fray just a little. I stayed frozen in that tiny orbit, letting the quiet linger. Letting her be herself for a few more seconds before reality demanded movement. And as I turned back to the bench, pretending to check the tools, I couldn't shake it. That faint smile, her subtle hesitation, the tension in her shoulders, they stayed with me, heavy and light all at once, like a secret pulse that wouldn't stop. The shop had emptied hours ago, leaving only the hum of fluorescent lights and the faint hiss of the air conditioner. Outside, rain tapped against the windows in uneven rhythms, like a metronome for thoughts I didn't want to think. She was bent over the counter, cataloging receipts, sleeves pushed up, hair falling into her face. I wanted to tell her something, anything, but the words wouldn't form. Do you ever wonder if we're doing the right thing? I asked, almost whispering, as if saying it louder might shatter the quiet. She froze, pencil hovering above the paper. For a second, I thought I'd pushed too far. Then she exhaled slowly, a tiny shiver passing over her shoulders. I sometimes, she admitted. Not a confession exactly. Not enough to call it honesty. But enough that I wanted to lean closer, to hear more, to fix whatever it was that made her hesitate. I noticed how tired she looked, the faint shadow under her eyes, the way her fingers shook ever so slightly when she picked up a pen. And I wanted to brush it away, but the space between us felt electric and dangerous. Every instinct screamed don't, but my heart ignored it. A flash of lightning lit up the room. I realized we were closer than I'd intended. Our arms brushed. Just a brush, but it sent a spark up my spine, and I caught myself holding my breath. I wanted to say something, reassure her, tease her, just exist in that fraction of a second, but nothing came. Then the phone rang. She jumped slightly, and I realized it was her ex, calling again. I stepped back, giving her space, feeling both relief and disappointment. Her hand trembled as she answered. I stayed silent, pretending to check the tools on the counter, but every syllable of her conversation etched itself into my chest. She hung up quickly, apologizing for the interruption, brushing a hand over her face. I wanted to reach out, to offer something, comfort, understanding, but she pulled away, her guard back up, smooth and unyielding. The rain softened to a drizzle. I cleared my throat, tried to steady the heat in my chest. I guess it's late, I said, but my voice sounded hollow even to me. She nodded, still avoiding my eyes. Then, without a word, she started gathering her things. I moved a step closer, almost instinctively, and our hands brushed again. I froze, painfully aware that I could reach out, that I wanted to, that a single step might erase all boundaries we'd silently built. And then, just as I leaned in, just as my hand almost touched hers, a knock on the door startled us both. Her friend's voice carried from the lobby, cheerful and unaware. The moment broke like glass. She stepped back, closing the distance between us with a faint sigh. I watched her coat swirl as she left, the storm outside reflecting in the window behind her. My hand lingered in the air, hovering where hers had been. And I knew, as I straightened the counter and forced my mind back to repair tickets, that the memory of that near touch would haunt me longer than the storm ever could. The night had settled into a soft, oppressive quiet. The shop was empty, but neither of us moved to leave. I leaned against the counter, heart thudding in ways I hadn't expected, while she stared out the window at the faint glow of streetlights reflecting on wet asphalt. "I don't know what we're doing," I finally said, my voice low, almost strangled by the weight of it. She didn't turn to look at me. Her shoulders were tense, her hands clasped in front of her, knuckles pale. "I don't either," she admitted after a long pause, almost reluctantly. There was no anger, no teasing, just the raw, quiet truth of it. I swallowed hard. My chest felt tight, like I'd been holding my breath for hours. "It's different with you," I said, fumbling. I don't usually." I stopped. The words didn't matter. The pause did. She finally turned, slow and deliberate, and our eyes met. There was recognition there, of something fragile, something dangerous, but also of restraint. She tilted her head slightly, studying me as if she could see every unspoken thought racing behind my eyes. "Different how?" she asked, and I heard the hesitation in her voice, the small tremor that betrayed how much she was holding back. I took a step closer, then stopped. The space between us was charged, taut, but not for reasons I could name. I can't stop thinking," I confessed. "Even when I try, even when I know I shouldn't." Her gaze faltered. She bit her lower lip, just once, but it was enough to make my chest seize. She started, then shook her head, as if the next words might undo everything. She took a deep breath, letting it out slowly, deliberately. We stood there in silence, the quiet between us heavier than any storm. The air felt thick, pressing down on my shoulders, and yet I couldn't leave. I didn't want to leave. I just wanted to exist in this fragile, suspended moment where nothing had to be decided. "You're young," she said finally, almost to herself. Not a warning, not a judgment, just an observation, a statement of fact, and yet it carried the weight of unspoken consequences. "And you're—" I trailed off, unsure. "Older, wiser, complicated. Everything I wasn't." But I didn't say it. She looked away, eyes tracing the faint scratches on the counter. "I'm more than I seem," she said softly. "And maybe I'm not ready for." She paused, stared at nothing. At me, at the distance between us. I swallowed, and the silence pressed in again, heavier now, charged with all the things we couldn't say aloud. Finally, she spoke again, voice trembling just slightly. "I'm scared of what this could mean for both of us." Her words hit me like a cold wave, sharp and unrelenting. Scared, not of me, of herself, of the pull between us, of the consequences neither of us could name. I didn't answer. I couldn't. I just nodded, letting the weight of her confession hang in the air. And then, almost in a whisper, almost too quiet to hear, "I don't know if I can be what you think I am." I showed up at the shop earlier than usual, hoping for a quiet moment alone with her. She was already there, sipping coffee at the back, her coat draped over the chair like it belonged somewhere else entirely. "Morning," I said, trying to sound casual, but my stomach twisted when she looked up, eyes tired, guarded, but somehow softer than before. "Morning," she replied, voice low. Then, after a pause, almost as if testing herself, she added, "Do you ever think about the people we used to lose?" I froze, not expecting that. My hands lingered on the counter, awkward. "Sometimes," I said cautiously. "Why?" She shrugged, staring at the table as if the surface held all her memories. "I got careless once. Let someone in. Trusted them. And then," her fingers traced invisible patterns on the cup. "They left. Not because they wanted to, but because I let them go." I didn't know what to say. There was no way to fix the tremor in her voice, no words that could erase the weight behind her confession. I cleared my throat. "You're not careless," I said, softly, not entirely sure I believed it for myself. I hesitated. "You're strong. You just—" I trailed off, because I wasn't sure how to finish, Wasn't sure how close I could get without breaking something fragile in her. Her eyes flicked up at me for the first time, meeting mine for a moment that felt impossibly fragile. There was recognition there, an understanding that went beyond words. "You sound like you know what that feels like," she said quietly. I lost someone," I admitted. A small, personal truth I'd kept tucked away because it wasn't something I shared lightly. Someone I thought I couldn't live without. And then, I swallowed. I did. But I keep thinking maybe I didn't really let them go. Not fully. She leaned back slightly, a small, involuntary shiver passing through her. The silence that followed wasn't empty. It was full of all the things we weren't saying. Pain, longing, mistakes, memories that clung like shadows. I noticed how she pressed her lips together, how her hands twitched around the cup, the way she blinked, slow and deliberate, like she was trying to stop herself from revealing too much. I wanted to reach out, not to fix her, not to tell her it was okay, but just to acknowledge it, to sit in that shared vulnerability. Then she spoke, voice barely above a whisper. "I have a letter. I never sent it. I never could." Her hand hovered over her bag, pulling out a folded envelope, edges worn. "It's from him." I watched her, silent. She opened it carefully, finger tracing the faded ink. For a moment, she froze. And then, she laughed softly, a sound threaded with melancholy, remembrance, and something heavier. I realized then that everything we'd tiptoed around, the unspoken tension, the shared glances, the small hesitations, was nothing compared to this. Two people carrying ghosts into the same room, aware, watching, but not daring to cross the line. And as she handed me the envelope, just for a moment, our fingers brushed. Not a touch of romance, not a spark of desire, just a quiet, seismic acknowledgement of how fragile and human we were. I held it, feeling the weight of both her past and mine, and knew that nothing would ever feel the same after this. The shop smelled faintly of solder and old paper, a comfort that neither of us wanted to disturb. We had been sorting through a stack of receipts and repair tickets in silence for nearly half an hour, and for the first time, the quiet didn't feel heavy. It felt like acknowledgement. I looked up at her, and she was watching me, not with guarded eyes, not with hesitation, but with something softer, almost reluctant, almost forgiving. I realized then that we had crossed some invisible line, not one of romance, not one of certainty, but of understanding. "You're quiet today?" I said, almost an observation, almost a test. She shrugged, adjusting the scarf around her neck. "I guess I don't need to fill every silence." There it was, the tiny, human truth. Neither of us needed to speak constantly, because the silence itself carried everything we'd been avoiding. I leaned slightly forward, just enough that the tips of our fingers brushed as I reached for a small screwdriver. She didn't pull away. Our hands lingered, a mere touch, but it said more than words ever could. Acknowledgement, patience, a quiet agreement that we were here, together, in this strange, fragile space. She started, then stopped. I could see the words forming, almost falling, but she didn't finish them. And I didn't need her to. I understood. Not because I was clever, not because I'd planned it, but because every awkward glance, every pause, every small hesitation had led us here. I smiled softly, careful, and she returned it, a half-smile that reached her eyes. The air between us felt warmer, somehow safer, as if we had been balancing on the edge of something sharp for months, and now, just for a moment, the ground beneath us was steady. We worked side by side, organizing receipts, sorting tools, but every so often, our hands would brush again. Not deliberately, not with intention, but as if the universe had decided that some things didn't need explanation. At one point, she leaned back in her chair, stretching, and her elbow nudged mine. I caught her wrist lightly, almost instinctively, just enough to steady her. Our eyes met, and we both smiled softly, small and private. No declarations. No confessions, just acknowledgement. The kind that is heavier than words because it doesn't need them. I noticed how tired she still looked, how her hair fell slightly out of place, how she pressed her lips together when she concentrated. And I realized, quietly, that all of it, the mistakes, The hesitations, the past heartbreaks, had led to this small, inevitable convergence. I moved my chair closer, and she didn't flinch. The tips of our shoulders touched lightly as we leaned over the same repair ticket. A simple, human closeness, but it held a kind of gravity I couldn't ignore. And then she looked at me, and I looked at her, and for the first time, I didn't have to say anything. Our fingers brushed one last time, lingering a heartbeat longer than necessary. That was enough. Enough to acknowledge the bond, enough to make it real, enough to tell us both, without saying it, that whatever this was, it couldn't be unseen, and we didn't want it to be. I leaned back, letting the silence settle around us. She did the same. No words, no promises. Just two people in a room, fragile, flawed, and entirely certain of each other in that quiet, imperfect way. And for the first time, I felt the weight lift, not with resolution, but with quiet finality. It's been months since that night in the shop. Sometimes I find myself back there, leaning against the same counter, tracing the same scratches, smelling the faint hint of solder and coffee that somehow lingers, no matter how often they clean. I don't come here to work. I come here to remember. We've moved forward in ways that aren't flashy or dramatic. No declarations, no cinematic moments, just a quiet understanding that neither of us could ever unsee what had happened between us. And that's enough. I've changed. I notice details now. How people hesitate before they speak. How a small pause can mean more than words ever could. How vulnerability isn't weakness. And how patience can be tested in ways you don't see coming. I think I'm softer now, but also more certain of what I want, even if I don't say it aloud. She's changed, too. I can see it in the way she moves, the way her smile reaches her eyes more often, less guarded, a little lighter. There's a gentleness in her presence now, a warmth that doesn't feel performative. I know she carries her past with her, but she's learning how to let someone in without fearing the outcome. Our connection hasn't become something loud or dramatic. It hasn't needed to. It's in the small things, the brush of a hand, the shared silence, the way our eyes find each other in a room without words. It's earned, imperfect, and entirely ours. I think about love differently now. It's not about grand gestures or instant gratification. It's about noticing, about leaning into the quiet, about carrying someone's weight without being asked. It's about patience, about allowing space for flaws and scars and awkward hesitations. It's about the slow accumulation of moments that, together, feel like a home. Sometimes I catch myself smiling at nothing, remembering her laugh, the way she tucks her hair behind her ear when she's nervous, or that faint crease between her brows when she's concentrating. And then I realize, I'm not just remembering. I'm carrying those moments with me, and they make the ordinary feel extraordinary. We didn't need fireworks to understand each other. We needed patience, quiet acknowledgement, and the courage to let small gestures speak louder than words ever could. That's what made everything inevitable, and that's what made it real. I glance at the counter again, at the tools neatly arranged as they always are, and I think of her. I think of us. Not perfect, not fully resolved, but fully human, fully present, and fully ours. And that, I realize, is enough. If this story made you feel something, let me know in the comments. Would you want more stories like this?